Good evening, day walkers and night stalkers. It's me, your twisted southern horror queen, coming to you live from under full moon right here in southeastern Louisiana. I'm glad you creepy kids are hanging out with me tonight, trying to get some of my technical stuff taken care of right quick, because we've been having a few little issues here during our broadcast on the Twisted Southern Horror Queen show. So if you are a regular watcher, you know that things look a little bit different in the background tonight. There's a reason for that, but I'm not going to give you a whole lot of explanation. What I will tell you is I need for you guys to do me a favor. I want you to pay very close attention to the background tonight. And if you see anything going on behind me, let me know. Give me a little shout out. Tell me what you're seeing back there, because there's all kind of crazy stuff going on in the girl cave this evening, just like every other evening. Big shout out to Ronnie and Lori Owens. Brandon Vale, my boy, is in the house. And, of course, Big Johnny Blender is stalking me from downstairs right now. But he may make an appearance later, especially if something decides to show up during the broadcast tonight. So you guys keep your eyes peeled. Very important. Share the video. Maybe send it to a few of your friends' timelines and tell them to help me out. I need some extra eyes in the background behind me tonight. Let me know if you see anything out of the ordinary going on. Of course, the girl cave is not exactly your ordinary room, but there are some extraordinary things going on in it these days. So without going into any further detail, let's go ahead and get the ball rolling this evening. There's a whole other level of creepy and crazy that I want to tell you guys all about. And you've heard me raving about it for quite a while now. That's right. I'm talking about my creepy crate. Our little creepy friends over at the lineup are probably stalking around in some fog-laden, cobweb-covered crypt as we speak right now, looking for anything bizarre or macabre that they can put their grubby little hands on. These guys can tell you where some of the scariest places on earth are, because that's where they find the coolest stuff, right? Now, if you've already got your creepy crate, you know how crazy stuff is that's in there, how much they can cram into these little bitty boxes, right? Not exactly little bitty, but it's amazing what they can get into these boxes. So do the math, creepy kids. Any box you get is going to have over $50 worth of the spookiest little surprises inside. But that's nowhere near what we're going to pay for it. And as if that's not enough, you guys get an extra $5 off of your subscription just because you tune into my madness here on The Edge Radio. They're big fans of the Twisted Southern Horror Queen show. They watch it up there in New York as well. So you're not the only creepy kids in town. They're everywhere, I promise you. So if you haven't subscribed yet, get your little asses over to authorlyngibson.com. Click on the creepy crate icon that's on the right-hand side of the home page. You can find out a little bit more information there. And then subscribe. But don't forget to use the code TWISTED when you go to check out, because that's when you're going to get your $5 off, guys. All right, so want more crazy discounts? Good, because you know we've got that here. Tune in to Big Johnny Blender's show, Whiskey, Cars, and Cigars, on Wednesday nights at 7 Central and 8 Eastern, and he'll hook you guys up with some discount codes from the Adrian's Fury Dragster sponsors like Renegade Racing Fuel and RJS, Racers Direct, Finch Automotive, Weld Wheels, Mickey Thompson Tires, and yeah, there's a whole lot more, so you guys just have to tune in and find out. Can't forget D&M Graphics and Surreal Studios. And, of course, one of my favorites, Naked Wines. But I do have another favorite, Hawaiian Island Shine. Oh, my God. This stuff is the bomb for cleaning your vehicles. I swear to you, I never, ever, ever put soap on my car. Never. Maybe the tires, maybe the wheels, that's it. So I was kind of gritting my teeth the first time I used this stuff because it's got bubbles in it. And I'm like, oh, this is going to end badly. I was wrong. It happens every once in a while. Don't tell Johnny Blender I said that. He'd never believe I admitted it anyway. But this stuff is awesome. And the real test for me is how does it hold up after you drive through rain and get all the road sludge kicked back up on your car after it's been washed. It usually pisses me off. I got to tell you, it happened twice since I washed it. I get the car home and it's spotless. There's not even water spots left on it when it dries. That tells you something right there. It used to take me an entire day to detail Jezebel, but I got to tell you, a couple hours, I'm done, and it looks like I have just been over every single inch of her. So she's awesome. Rhonda, my girl, is in the house. I was looking for you last week. We were talking about Carl Pruitt, the chain strangler that's killing folks from his grave. That's up there in your neck of the woods. I bet you know a little bit about that, huh, Rhonda? Tell me what you know about that. I see Tabitha Patches here. Ken Thibodeau's in the house. And let's see who else. Oh, Susie, we're going to see you this weekend. We're so looking forward to checking you guys out, spending some time with y'all. So now that we got a couple extra people. Oh, I see Chris Sill up there too. Hey, Chris. There's a few more people with their eyes on the video right now. I'm going to explain again right quick before we get everything rolling. You notice the background's a little bit different. I've switched the camera around on my opposite side of my desk. For the last couple of weeks, there's been all kind of crazy stuff going on with my video feed during the broadcast. I've actually seen the screen blip a couple of times. I'm using a different microphone. I'm using a different camera, and I'm using a different angle in the girl loft. I need for you guys to keep your eyes on the background, everything that's behind me. Let me know if you see anything out of the ordinary going on, any little thing. If there's anything coming through the feed on the video that shouldn't be there or looks a little weird, I need to know what's going on. So we're kind of running a little test tonight. Just to see what's going to happen or what won't happen. So let me know if you see something. It's very important. All right, so now I got all the shout outs out for the evening. And let's see, I think I'll prompt for an ad space right here before we get started for the producers. And it's always a good time to take another sip of my naked wines, right? Yeah, so now it's about that time, folks. Dim the lights. Kick out the damn kids, lock the door so they don't get back in. Grab a tasty adult beverage of your own because we're about to get our scary on up in here. All right, I'm going to start out tonight in Arizona. So if you guys are planning a trip anywhere near Arizona in the near future, I've got a haunted hotel I want to recommend to you. Make sure you book a reservation at Aspen's Hotel Jerome. This sucker is supposedly swarming with ghosts. So, you know me, I had to look into the history of the building, and I can tell you why a few of those guys are still hanging out. Hey, Steve Godwin, good to see you tonight, you dirty dog. All right, so the Jerome was built in 1889 by Jerome B. Wheeler. He was one of the former co-owners of Macy's department store. And by the time it was up and running, the Hotel Jerome was one of the first buildings in Colorado to feature full electric lighting. And in the early 1900s, the tourism industry in Aspen bit the dust, and it left the building to be used for other things other than what its original use was intended for. Now, legend has it that over 9,000 people have died there. This joint was actually a hospital back in the day, and that's a whole lot of pain and suffering, folks, and y'all know that makes for prime haunting grounds. But even better than that, the entire complex had been used as a morgue at one point. So after the hospital days were over, this 30,000 square foot building sat vacant for around 40 years, and then this Dodge dealership comes along and they buy it. Well, a few years later, the Dodge dealership goes under. And that's when the authors picked it up, and they started turning it back into a hotel. Well, there'd been rumors for a long time that this property was haunted. But the authors, yeah, they were big-time skeptics. It didn't take them very long before they were turned into believers, though. These folks had barely opened this joint up. As a matter of fact, there were only 6 rooms that they were available, that were completed and ready to be rented in the beginning. And the folks that rented those rooms out had some serious stories to tell. Immediately, the authors started getting these reports from the guests that they'd heard these voices in their rooms and in the hallways, but when they went to go check them out, there wasn't anybody there. We've heard that before, right? Well, there's also frequent reports of the sound of something that's rolling up and down the halls at night, likely the ghostly remnants of gurneys being transported back and forth to different sections of the old hospital, I think. So these reports were coming in so often that the guys that own the place, the authors, decided to start keeping this guest journal for all their visitors to write down all their little haunted experiences down. So nowadays they're saying they fill a 300-page journal every single year. And most of the reports that are coming in from guests that stayed on the 3rd floor. And there's a pretty good reason for that. That's where the surgery rooms were. And that's where most of the hospital's patients died. But not all the ghosts that hang out there were patients. So there's a common encounter with the ghost of a cat that runs around there. And the cat is known to jump into the guest beds and walk around a little bit, and then all of a sudden it just disappears. Well, if you check into room 310, some folks say you may decide you're never leaving home again. Well, a lot of guests have reported encountering this little boy in a towel, and he's soaking wet and he's shivering. And, it's not so unusual because room 310 actually looks over the hotel pool. It's when the kid disappears and leaves nothing but a trail of wet footprints behind him that the guests start screaming their heads off and run to the front desk. Hey, Gavin, good to see you tonight, honey. So the water boy is supposedly the ghost of a 10-year-old boy who drowned in the hotel pool in 1936. Now, the hotel staff have been so rattled by this little dude's ghost and other crazy-ass experiences that they've had on the 3rd floor that a lot of the staff absolutely refuse to work on the 3rd floor. There's also reports from another 3rd floor room where 2 suicides took place. Now, one of them was a miner that jumped from the railing of his balcony. This dude's name was Henry O'Callister. And he was a silver miner back in the day who had traveled to Aspen in 1889. And he actually wound up striking it pretty big out in the mines. So he decided he would live the high life for a little while. And he checked into Hotel Jerome. And that's where he met Clarissa Wellington. Well, Miss Clarissa was the daughter of a very wealthy upper crust Boston family. And you know what happened from there. Despite their different positions in society, they both fall head over heels for each other. But the Wellingtons, yeah, they weren't really having that. They weren't exactly thrilled with the thought of their daughter hooking up with a lowly miner. So they send Clarissa, kicking and screaming back to Boston. And old Henry, he was heartbroken. The dude was devastated. And the legend says that he spent his remaining fortune on booze and he died a lonely, broken man when he jumped over that railing. But the hotel guests and staff have claimed to have heard Henry's heart-wrenching sobs, and many folks claim to have even seen his ghostly figure walking the halls at night, all heartbroken and alone with no Clarissa there. Now, the other suicide that took place there was a guest from back when the hotel had just been built. He was a businessman that shot himself in the head, so I guess business wasn't that great. But these weren't the only suicides that went down in the Jerome. There was a caretaker that hanged himself in the boiler room. But he's not just hanging around there anymore. Your boy's there working his ass off, and folks claim to see him. He's pulling his shift, walking around in those same drab gray coveralls, carrying that same antiquated tool bag all through the hotel. It's not uncommon for guests to see him, and nobody's really shocked when they come up front to make their reports. Now, there's another maintenance man. His name was Harvey Clyde. Wasn't suicide, but he had a pretty nasty death. He was actually crushed by an elevator that he was working on there in 1935. But he still hangs around that same spot. As a matter of fact, he rides that elevator up and down, just like he's kind of watching over anybody that comes anywhere near it to make sure nothing happens to them. He wants to make sure he keeps them safe. For some reason, I can't see what that says. I'm still having a few little technical difficulties, so a little something's going on here. I'll go back and read those notes later, Gavin. It's important, though. Keep writing them because I need to see. I'll be able to go back and see later exactly what you guys are saying. Not surprising, though. Y'all keep telling me what you're seeing going on back there. So there's also stories about early hotel staff that hangs out there still. Very dedicated back in the day. You can't find workers like that nowadays. Anyway, this chick's name was Katie Kerrigan, and she was a 16-year-old maid that worked at the hotel in 1892. Well, she was a pretty good-looking chick, and she got more than her fair share of attention from the wealthy hotel guests that stayed there. And her coworkers were jealous as hell. So they're constantly harassing her, giving her grief over any little thing that they possibly can. Well, one night, these haggard old bitches told her that they'd taken her kitten and thrown it into the ice-cold pond behind the hotel. So Katie freaks the hell out. She runs outside in the freezing cold to go look for this little kitten, and she winds up catching pneumonia, and she dies 3 days later. Well, the hotel staff claim that she's still hanging around there today, and she's quite a little trickster. Katie seems to have this thing for going into rooms that have just been cleaned and just been made up for new guests, and she likes to mess things up. She'll tear the beds apart, throw the sheets and the comforters on the floor, and she has a thing with leaving soapy water all over the sinks and the vanities in the bathroom. So recently, kind of recently, this travel writer named Chris Gray Faust had a eerie kind of run-in with Katie while she was staying there in 2010. So she had gone out to take a ghost tour in Aspen, and her friend Catherine skipped the tour and went back to their room to rest up. Well, when she gets there, she finds out the room is hot as ass. So she starts looking around for the thermostat, and when she finds it, she sees that somebody had turned the heat on and gapped it way back. So she turns the heat down, and a few minutes later, she decides to go into the bathroom and kind of freshen up a little bit. Well, when she walks into the bathroom, the vanity's a mess, and there's soapy water in the sink. So when her friend Chris comes back from the ghost tour, she asked her, well, why'd you turn the damn heater on? Why'd you leave such a mess in the bathroom? Well, Faust tells her that she didn't touch the damn thermostat, and she didn't even go into the bathroom when they checked in. So Catherine takes her into the bathroom to show her all the mess, and they both look around and actually figure out that none of the bars of soap had even been taken out of their wrappers. So needless to say, they were both a little bit rattled, and they did stay the night in the room, but they stayed the night in the room with the lights on and the TV going all night long. So there's a ton of haunted houses. We've done haunted hotels. So now we're going to move to haunted houses. And, all of them like to say that they're the most haunted house in the area. Well, this one does too. This is called the Sally House, and it's still located at 508 North 2nd Street in Atchison, Kansas. Now, it was originally built in 1867 for the Finney family. Now, Michael, who was the father of the Finney family, say that 5 times fast. Not happening. So anyway, he was the doctor, and he ran his practice on the lower level of the house while his wife, 2 sons, and a daughter all lived upstairs. Well, the original haunting of this house seems to stem from this one event. One morning, this little 6-year-old girl was rushed in to see the doctor, and she was really, really sick. Well, he gives her a good look over, and he figures out that she's suffering from appendicitis. So she's in really bad shape, and he knows there is nothing left to do but operate, because if this kid's appendix ruptured, she wasn't going to survive it. So the doctor takes her into the exam room and starts kind of trying to prep her for surgery. Well, the little girl looks around and she sees all these tools and medical equipment, and she freaks the hell out, right? So the doctor starts struggling, trying to put the little girl out with ether, and of course she starts fighting him tooth and nail. Well, he finally thinks that he's got her knocked out, and he goes to make his first incision. And guess what? She ain't knocked out. So the kid comes to and starts kicking and screaming because she's terrified. She doesn't know what the hell's going on. Now this doctor's really in a bind. He's fighting the clock. He knows he's got to get that appendix out of this little girl. She's fighting him. He's trying not to kill her with the scalpel. He has no choice but to go on with the surgery. And the kid still is doing her absolute best to fight him off. Well, Sally dies on the table anyway, despite his best efforts. And unfortunately, her last conscious thought was that she was being tortured by this doctor. So now Sally's a permanent fixture in this house, but she's not really terrified of the doctor or surgery anymore. In fact, she's another little prankster, but it wasn't always like that. The doctor and his family lived in this home until the last of them passed away, and the property was eventually put up for rent. Well, several different families lived in this home, but not very many of them stayed longer than just a few months, at least not until the early 1990s. Now, this is one of the families that actually did make reports of attacks that they'd experienced in this home. It was the husband that seemed to bear the brunt of it. On several occasions, he would be burned or he'd be cut. And it was a thought that Sally was still trying to retaliate against this doctor by attacking the husband. So the family stayed in the home for less than a year. Then this old chick moves into the house. She really didn't seem to be bothered by Sally at all. She stayed there for 3 years until she got too old to take care of herself. After she moved out, a young couple with a newborn moved in. And that's when Sally got really active. But Sally wasn't alone anymore. So Sally's activities, as I said, were mostly pranks. For example, pictures would be found hanging upside down, lights would dim and brighten on their own, appliances would turn off and on by themselves, and then one night the couple returns home from an evening out and they find all of their kids' toys arranged in a circle on the nursery floor. So it's hardly anything to be really terrified by, right? Well, Sally was terrified. And it seemed that she had kind of taken to warning the young family of this other spirit that had manifested in this home. So this spirit had a completely different agenda. It was violent and it was very negative. Not very long after they moved in, the husband starts experiencing these violent attacks. These long claw marks would suddenly appear on his torso. And it was happening frequently enough that he started noticing that right before something would happen to him, the room would get really, really cold right before these attacks came. So they were becoming more and more violent as time went on. And sometimes this evil little entity decided it would take advantage of him and possess him temporarily. For example, there's this one night when he's laying down on the couch taking a little nap. So the dude is like, out. He's out cold. And all of a sudden, he sits up from a dead sleep. He glares at his wife and he makes this brash announcement. He is mine. In a voice that was not his. So the wife later reported that he laid back down, went back to sleep. About 20 minutes later, he wakes up, but he had no recollection of what had happened. So this family starts making reports, and the house is investigated several times by some serious investigators, like the Travel Channel, the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, and Paramount Pictures actually sent some investigators in there, and they wound up making a made-for-TV movie based on the Sally house titled The Heartland Ghost. So if you've seen that, now you know where it came from. So none of the investigators ever left this house empty-handed. And it seemed that Sally was always willing to put on a show for them. Sally's been recorded, she's been photographed, she's been communicated with via EVP and Ouija board. But on the flip side, that negative entity decided it was going to make several appearances as well. So it was in the middle of one of these investigations when the husband feels this attack coming on. These devices started going off the scale, and they notified the investigators that there was a drop in temperature. So the cameras automatically went live at that time. And it was a good thing that they did, too, because at that very moment, they were able to film scratch marks as they appeared on the husband's stomach. And, of course, all of the rest of the electromagnetic field sensors are just going off the chart. Well, as years have passed, it's become apparent that even more entities have moved into this house, and more recent events are progressing. Families that have lived in there, they are still complaining about voices inside the walls, flying objects, things disappearing and then turning up in really weird places. Full-bodied apparitions have been seen and photographed, not just Sally, but men and women too. Several unexplained fires have actually popped up in this house as well, and then they just suddenly self-extinguish. The house, other than the spirits that are attached to it, is now vacant, and the current owners are allowing ongoing paranormal investigations to continue. You guys have got to be seeing some crazy stuff going on behind me, because I am feeling some crazy stuff going on behind me. Can't wait to go back and look at the footage. Don't forget, shout out if you see anything. I need to know specifically where you're seeing it, and if you can tell me about how far into the video that we are. We kicked off at 7 o'clock, 7:27 right now, so if that gives you guys an idea of what to write in for the time when you see something going on. So, like I said, there's a ton of documented evidence of occurrences at this house. We could talk all night about it, but instead I'll let you guys go to their website and check it out yourself. It's thesallyhouse.com. It's S-A-L-L-I-E, not S-A-L-L-Y. One of the coolest reports that I found was actually on their page. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. So this went down in 1993. The owners of the house back there in that time felt really sorry for Sally. They'd become familiar with her because she'd made enough appearances and made her presence known plenty of times with them. So, they kind of adopted her as well. And they felt like it had to be horribly lonely for her existing in the darkness with no affection and no little special things of her very own. So they decided to go and buy a little gift for her. Well, since Sally had been so fond of their baby, his name was Tony, they bought a baby boy doll for her and wrapped it up in some colorful wrapping paper and set it in the middle of the nursery floor, because that's usually where she appeared the most often, or made her presence known the most often. So the gift sat there in the middle of the floor untouched for several weeks, so everybody thought. Well, one afternoon, the wife takes the baby into the nursery to change his diaper. And when she finishes, she leaves the room with the baby, and then she realized that, well, I forgot something. So she goes and takes the baby, puts the baby in the playpen in his nursery, and she goes back to pick up whatever it was that she forgot. Well, when she gets to the doorway, she's standing there because she realized that something's out of place, but she couldn't quite figure out what it was. So she stands there in the doorway for a little while trying to figure it out. Eventually she gives up, goes over to the crib to grab whatever it was that she forgot, and she looks down in the crib to see that boy baby doll that they had bought for Sally. Obviously it wasn't there a few minutes ago when she was changing the baby's diaper, but it was there then. So instead of looking around and rooting around and picking up the box, she left everything the way it was and waited for her husband to get home. So together they investigated the still wrapped package, and they saw that none of the tape had been disturbed from off the wrapping. So after they had concluded nothing had been tampered with, they go ahead and take the wrapping paper off. And the only thing that they see that's different about the box is that one of the flaps had been bent back a little bit. Other than that, there was nothing that had changed about the box except for the fact that the baby doll was no longer in it. So perhaps it took Sally several weeks to get the doll out of the package, but regardless, this seemingly impossible feat happened. And it's only one of a multitude of recorded events that have happened at the Sally house. Hey, Speedy Joe West, good to see you tonight, honey. So from one child goes to another. This is a story of a young family's experience with a child ghost that was nothing like Sally. So before I step into that, I think I'll give the producers another spot to put a commercial in. Swallow a little bit more of this naked wine. God, that's yummy, y'all. That set was for you, Rhonda. The next one's for you, Susie. All right, so Amanda and Roy Twig and their 2-year-old daughter move into what they think is their dream house in March of 2013. Everything's cool. The house is perfect. The family's perfect. Everything was great, at least in the beginning. So then the weird shit starts happening, right? Well, they assume it was just because they were in a new environment and they kind of blew things off and, it's new. It'll go away, right? Never. So Amanda's biggest thing was she said that a lot of her stuff would come up missing, but it would always turn up somewhere else. The biggest thing with her was it was her shoes. So we're dealing with a ghost that has a shoe fetish. That's going to be me, y'all. Anyway, one day, as well after they had finally settled into their new environment, she said that they noticed their little girl had started carrying on these lengthy conversations with, well, nobody that they could see. So at first the parents thought it was cute, and they even thought that the kid was intellectually advanced because it was unusual for a child that age to take on a pretend friend, right? But unfortunately, their child was just like most other kids. They all have the ability to see and carry on conversations with folks that aren't there, that adults don't see anyway. We can't say they're not there, but the adults don't typically see them. And yes, of course, I'm talking about ghosts and other spiritual entities. But their daughter starts having these night terrors. And eventually it got to the point where not one single night would go by that this kid didn't wake up screaming her head off at the top of her lungs for apparently no reason. Well, one afternoon, the whole family, wife, husband, and the kid, are all sitting in the living room and they're chilling, watching TV. Well, the little girl starts staring up the ceiling. She just starts babbling away. She's having this in-depth conversation with apparently just herself because Amanda and the husband are sitting right there and there's nobody else in the room, right? Well, Amanda thought it was cute, so she grabs her cell phone and she snaps a quick picture. And she scoots over closer to her husband to show the picture to him, and she realizes along with the husband that the kid actually was talking to something. That something was hovering above her, and it wasn't a pretty thing. It was a dark entity that had the appearance of a little boy or a young boy, but the intent in this kid's eyes was anything but that of an innocent kid. This ghoul's eyes were piercing and they were angry, and his mouth was twisted into this evil snarl. Well, apparently this entity got pissed off that it had been caught on film, and now the parents are aware of him hanging around their kid. So it wasn't long after that when things started getting really, really bad around the little girl and around the rest of the family, as a matter of fact. So Amanda was waking up in the middle of the night, hearing her kid talk to this thing that they now knew to be a demon or some kind of dark entity. And when she'd go to her daughter's room, the doors on her wardrobe would start banging and the floorboards would creak like there was something really heavy walking across the floor, and the boards were kind of giving way underneath the weight. So Amanda wakes up one night and the little girl is just screaming hysterically. Well, when she runs into her room, Amanda suddenly gets flung up against the wall and she's pinned there and can't move. All she can do is sit there and stare in horror as her daughter's bed is bouncing up and down on the floor. So she's fighting against whatever it is that's got her pinned against the wall, and eventually she breaks free, snatches the kid up, and she runs downstairs and immediately went online to start looking for help. So kudos to her for that. Amanda decided that she would contact this local paranormal team called Paranormal Now, and she reached out immediately, and a couple days later they came for their initial visit. Well, this was a team of 4, and they were comprised of a medium with 15 years experience in his field and 3 investigators. So it was only a matter of minutes of them being inside the house before they confirmed what the Twigs already knew. The team was blown away over the amount of readings that they were immediately picking up there. All of their equipment was tweaking off the scales all at the same time. And only a few minutes after they get there, 2 members of the team sit down next to Amanda on the couch, and they start describing this wicked male entity that had attached itself to their daughter. Well, while they're sitting there describing this critter in great detail, this couch that all 3 of them are sitting on comes up off of the floor and then slams back down onto the floor very, very violently. So Amanda, of course, immediately gave permission for an exorcism, and the rite began soon after that. And several hours after ducking flying objects and foul odors and harrowing moans, the house was finally dubbed clean. Nice end to what could have potentially been a horrifying story, right? As if it wasn't horrifying enough, but when there's a child involved, yeah, it gets really hairy. And nobody wants to see anybody get hurt, right? So Amanda did the right thing, and she didn't screw around. She got the pros in as soon as the shit started hitting the fan, and I'm certain it was a harrowing experience, but had she waited even just a few days longer, at the pace this entity was strengthening, her daughter or anybody else in that house could have been seriously injured or worse. So how do you feel about one more haunted house story? Yeah, that's what I thought. We're going to talk about the Griffin house, and it's in my neck of the woods. One of those older plantation-style houses. Susie, this one's for you, sweetheart. Yummy. Okay, so this is, like I said, one of those gorgeous old plantation-style homes. It was built in 1852 by Adam Griffin. It is now at what's known at 1447 Constant Street in New Orleans. And, this joint's got the typical high ceilings and big rooms, and, most of the high-end homes kind of look the same back in the day. And it was built with the intention of hosting the most elite balls and other events. And the tragic thing is that Griffin only got to stay in this house for a few months before he had to haul ass out of the Crescent City, because the Federal Army was on its way to New Orleans. So in 1862, as we all know, New Orleans was under siege, and the Union troops had been taking over all these big plantation homes to house their men and their supplies and MASH units and, whatever they needed them for. And of course, the Griffin house wound up being one of these homes as well. Well, during the Civil War occupation period, the Griffin house was used as barracks for storing munitions, and that's where the haunted history kicks off at. So, as a matter of fact, some of the first soldiers that occupied this home reported hearing groans accompanied by the sound of clanging chains coming from the 3rd floor or the attic. It wasn't exactly ghost yet. I don't know, maybe a couple of them were. So all these guys, they decide they're going to man up, and they go upstairs to investigate, even though they're terrified of what they may encounter when they get up there. What they found was way worse than what they actually expected. Not a Lori event, but they did find several slaves that had been shackled to the walls, and a lot of them were in the advanced stages of starvation, and some of them were already dead. The slaves were in such bad shape that many of them were plagued with maggots that had infested their wounds, and the ones that could be saved were moved to a field hospital to be treated. Of course, most of them didn't make it. But shortly after that, the Griffin home also began to house prisoners of war. So now you've got all these slaves that were tormented in this attic, probably chained up there and forgotten when Griffin hauled ass out of the Crescent City. Unfortunately, well, maybe fortunately for some of them, that they may have lived through this experience. But during this time when they were housing the prisoners of war in the Griffin house, it was occupied, of course, by Union soldiers. Well, these two Confederate deserters that were dressed in Union soldier uniforms were caught looting back in the area. Well, back in the day, looting was a crime that was punishable by death. So they get arrested and then they get brought into the Griffin house. And the deserters, they continued to act like they were Union soldiers because they assumed that the punishment wouldn't be as severe as if they were tried as Confederate soldiers, which they truly were. So they were intent on convincing their captors that they played their roles very well, and they sing songs that were familiar to the Union soldiers, such as John Brown's Body. And some of the soldiers were pretty much convinced, and they started becoming sympathetic. So they befriended these two deserters, and they started hooking them up with whiskey and extra biscuits or whatever they could bring to them that would make their stay there a little bit more comfortable before they actually went to trial. Well, eventually the deserters found out that there would be no leniency during their sentencing. So they bribed a couple of guards to bring in a couple of pistols so they could shoot themselves before the sentence was passed. The two of them laid across from each other in their beds, each of them facing each other, shot each other in the chest. So that way they didn't have to go through all of the bad things that would have happened to them if they'd gone on trial. So it was reported that these deserters bled so profusely that their blood seeped through the floorboards and down the walls to the room downstairs. Well, after the war, the Griffin home was used commercially by several different owners. And throughout the years, those that had been employed there had reported seeing these two drunk soldiers, both holding bottles of whiskey, both of them singing John Brown's Body. There have also been reports of having heard the sound of marching boots that accompanied these singing voices. Well, in the early 1900s, the house that was used again commercially as a perfume bottling company and then as a union hiring hall. The next owner was a man who rebuilt air conditioners, and this dude just disappeared without a trace. There's no history on what happened to him, no death records, no nothing, just gone. So during this period, there were several reports of hearing these singing soldiers and hearing these marching boots, and there were also reports of screams and groaning accompanied by the sounds of clanging chains coming from the attic. And many folks that walked by the house, whether it be day or night, there were tons of reports of people seeing these two drunk-ass soldiers staring out of the second floor window with a bottle of whiskey sitting in the windowsill between them. The home was especially active in and around 1936 while it was being used as a lamp factory. Several of the workers that worked there reported that doors would open on their own and they would hear the deafening sound of these boots marching down the hall. And other people reported seeing and hearing these drunk-ass soldiers as well as seeing the blood that seeped through the ceiling and the walls on down into the second floor room. Now the new owners, this is pretty cool. New owners came along, and as they're doing their initial inspection of the property, they were damn near killed. They were standing downstairs, and all of a sudden this concrete block was thrown down from the second floor as they were standing at the base of the stairs. They hadn't seen the block coming. They'd both been dead. The kicker is there are no such concrete blocks used anywhere in the construction of this home. And after they cleaned their pants out and caught their breath, they went upstairs to investigate, and they found that there was nobody there. All the windows were locked, and there was not another concrete block like the one that had just been hurled at their heads. So a few years later, after everybody figures out that it was impossible to maintain a commercial tenant, the home was converted into a boarding house. Why not, right? So one of the first tenants was a widow that rented out the room on the second level. Why they would do this to this poor old woman, I have no idea. But one day she's sitting in her chair next to the window, and she's sewing. And she looks down and she sees this drop of blood on her arm. So she thought maybe she'd scratched herself or something, and she just, kind of wiped it away and went on about what she was doing. Well, a couple minutes later, she looked down, and there was another drop of blood on her arm. And as she's looking down, a couple more drops kind of just appear from out of nowhere. So the old lady looks up over her head, and she sees that blood is seeping through the ceiling above her and just dripping down the walls. So old lady decides that she was getting the hell out of there. She runs screaming and crying out of the house, never went back, sent her relatives to come and pack up her belongings. And while her relatives were inside, they didn't see any dripping blood or any blood stains. They didn't hear any marching boots. But when the last of them walked out with the last of her belongings and packed it up in the car, they looked up at the window where their grandmother was staying and saw these two drunk soldiers carrying on back and forth with a bottle of whiskey sitting in between them. So I guess the old guys are still hanging out and terrifying the hell out of folks. But that's what you get for looting. Thou shalt not steal, right? All right, so in the 1970s, this neighborhood had pretty much gone to shit. And a lot of these old, beautiful family estates had been overtaken by transients and druggies and alcoholics and winos, those sorts. Well, the Griffin home apparently fell the same fate. But it didn't last for very long because even the addicts and the transients were haunted when they crashed there. My guess the ghosts were responsible for freaking out all the druggies, and I think they probably caused quite a few bad trips for some of these poor bastards. And some of them, even though they're wasted and got needle tracks running up and down their arms, they go to the police and file reports and talk about these two men in some kind of uniforms that are drunk and raising all kind of hell in this house. And they're seeing blood on the ceilings and hearing chains clanging and hearing people moaning upstairs, but there's nobody there but them and their druggy friends. So I'm not real sure how the police handled that. I would imagine they didn't even bother to check it out. But I think we got a little bit of time left. I might be able to squeeze in just a little bit more scary tonight. Definitely can squeeze in another sip of this wine. So, folks, riddle me this. Beneath the glitz and glamour of West Palm Beach, Florida, where might one find a ghostly hangout fit for twisted-minded folks like us? I actually have an answer for you. It's called the Riddle House. So even amongst the posh and the elite, there stands a structure that's so tainted and so riddled with ghost and paranormal activity, they call it the most haunted house in the area. Now, the Riddle House was constructed at the turn of the century, and it was intended to be a family estate, but it was later repurposed as a funeral parlor, and there are plenty of ghosts there to this day. Else we wouldn't be talking about it here on the Twisted Southern Horror Queen show, right? So the Riddle House actually was the first mortuary to service the Palm Beach area. It was adjacent to the Woodlawn Cemetery, which was also the first burial ground offered to the public in the area. So the Riddle House had gained the nickname called the Gatekeeper's Cottage because it also housed the folks that looked after the cemetery. Well, the cemetery really needed folks looking after it too because it was often vandalized by grave robbers looking to make a morbid living by stealing jewelry and other possessions from the corpses that were buried there. So one of these cemetery caretakers is actually still patrolling the grounds today. Just after the construction and organization of the cemetery staff, a caretaker named Buck went into town to spend his weekly paycheck. But during his visit, Buck gets into an argument with somebody, and somebody murdered the old guy on the spot. Well, Buck didn't even skip a day of work. He was back at work the next day, and he's still on patrol today. As a matter of fact, he's spotted pretty frequently walking through that cemetery, searching for would-be grave robbers. But he's also known to return to the cottage and even join other workers on the front porch while they're eating their lunch. Now, Buck's not a malevolent spirit. He's just there carrying out his normal day-to-day routine. Still now today, several decades later. Now, the Riddle House was creepy enough during the day, but at night, it took on a seriously ominous air. Now, the staff that stayed in the house itself often complained of hearing the voices of these lingering souls in deep conversation. Now, there was a whole bunch of other sounds that they heard in a typical night, like chains being dragged up and down the stairs and knocking inside the walls, and of course, woeful moans emitted by the growing dead population that was accumulating there. In 1920, Carl Riddle, which was a city manager and superintendent at that time, he decides he was going to move into the Riddle House with his family. And of course, that's when it became the Riddle House. Well, he's the dude that converts the mortuary into a residence and then takes on the task of maintaining and overseeing the cemetery. Okay, see right there? No. Again, no. Not going to do it. I myself, of course, have no problem with the dead, but I have no plans on moving in with them, and I damn sure am not going to move into a mortuary, right? Not happening. So, real shocker here, immediately the family starts experiencing these strange occurrences, and they heard the same eerie sounds that the staff who stayed there before complained about. And folks, we all know that a haunted house is one thing, but when a haunted house is renovated, that's a whole other shitstorm. Spirits like to carry on their business as usual in their environment, in the things that their environment are typical to, and changing anything tends to piss them off. Even if it's just paint, they don't like it. Leave it alone. So during that time, the family lived in this house. There were constant tragedies that befell them. And as a matter of fact, not long after they moved in, a cemetery groundskeeper who was having some personal issues, probably had something to do with a woman, if you ask me. But anyway, the dude decides he's going to hang himself from the rafters in the attic. Thanks for that, right? So this ghost has pretty much dominated this space ever since, and he does not allow anyone up in the attic. He does not want to be bothered. He just wants to sit there or hang there and be miserable for eternity. Leave him the hell alone. So this little dude here, he's seen most frequently looking down from out of the attic windows from the outside. But occasionally he is spotted on the lower levels or walking around outside on the grounds. He's actually been photographed by different paranormal investigators, and he has materialized from the waist up with his head still in the noose that he hung himself from. As you can imagine, paranormal activity went haywire in that house after that. And most of the spirits had wandered around there. They'd been dead for a long time before they were brought into the house. Well, this one actually died in the house. So the Riddle's life became more and more complicated as well, and it was nearly impossible for them to maintain staff because of these hauntings. Y'all ain't paying me enough for this shit. I could just hear them. Anyway, some of these encounters actually started turning violent, and most of these occurrences were centered around the men that worked there. So the Riddles had decided they pretty much had enough, and Carl decided he was going to take a job somewhere else. So him and his family moved shortly after that, and they were freed from the haunted things that were going on there and that had so drained them and devastated their family for the past few years. But after the Riddles moved away, the house only became more sinister. Several businesses moved in, and they attempted to take over. And yeah, that didn't last very long. Not for any of them, as a matter of fact. Then somebody got the bright idea to use the house as a dormitory for female students of the Palm Beach Atlantic College. Anyway, this was back in the 1980s. As if the 80s weren't wild enough, let's just throw a whole bunch of women into this used-to-be morgue where this dude hung himself and is desperately haunted. Oh, yeah, that's what we need, a whole bunch of young ladies living in there. This is going to work great, right? I'd love to see PMS Week in that sucker at that time. Anyway, in 1995, this house was still in pretty bad shape, and it had been slated for demolition. But John Riddle, which was Carl's nephew, stepped in and he asked that the house be donated to him so that he could restore the structure. So he strikes a deal with the city, and John disassembles the house and reconstructed it in what's called a history park named Yesteryear. And Yesteryear kind of showcases structures that were built around the same era as the Riddle house. Now, a rookie would think, well, I guess that put an end to all the paranormal activity. We know better than that. We just talked about remodeling, and now they've moved the entire house. Oh, yeah, it's a party now, right? So, of course, yeah, all the spirits that hung out there were pissed. And if anything, things got worse, even worse than they were before. So the workers that had been hired to reconstruct the home, several of them were injured, frequently by tools that disappeared and that suddenly reappeared as they're being thrown at them from the attic. Wonder who did that, right? Ladders would be moved out from underneath them, and windows would shatter for no reason, showering the workmen in shards of glass and cutting them all up. And then this one carpenter, he had a terrifying experience while he was working in one of the lower level rooms. He never really knew exactly what happened. This fellow carpenter just happened to see the whole thing. So what happened is this dude's working, and all of a sudden a lid from a cast iron pot rose 3 feet into the air, flew across the room, and hit the carpenter in the head. Well, it knocked his ass out, right? So thankfully, this other carpenter that saw the whole thing had enough balls to run over there and grab the unconscious dude by his feet and drag him out of the house. But when he came to, both him and his co-worker hauled ass out of there, never went back, didn't even bother to go back for their tools. They're like, damn this, we're done, we're going home. So now there's another little mortuary that I wanted to tell you guys about, but I'm going to hold on to that till next week, or maybe even the week after that, because we're getting ready to pull out of here in just a couple of days for Pensacon. It's going to be a crazy-ass weekend. If you are anywhere near Pensacola, you guys need to come and check us out. We'll be at the Poseidon Bay area, along with a couple other cool cars, so the rumors say. There's going to be stages and shows, and anybody and everybody that's got anything to do with horror, all these celebrities are going to be there. Oh, my God, it's going to be crazy. Grab your cameras. Make sure you got a good charge on everything. Come take lots of pictures. Buy T-shirts. Buy books, of course. And come and check out me and Big Johnny Blender with the Adrian's Fury Dragster. We're going to be there in all our glory. It's going to be a badass weekend, and you're going to miss out if you don't show up. Rafe White, Shannon White are going to be there, and of course my friends Susie and Mike, they're going to be there as well. So come out, check us out, and hopefully if everything goes well and I'm not too hungover or whatever the case may be next Tuesday, we'll have another show. Guys, don't forget, check in. Make sure to tell me if you see anything going on in the background, or if you even think you saw something going on in the background. I need to know, and I need to know if you can tell me about how far into the show. And we may regroup on this a little bit later. But until next week, you guys keep it creepy, because you know I'm going to do it. I'll see y'all next Tuesday. Thanks for dropping in.